so before we get started, I just want to give you an idea of what we're trying to make. It's real simple. This is some extra that I had from the last one I did. You're just trying to create this. You're going to need walnut on both sides. I only have the one right now. So you're making your sandwich, right? We got walnut, maple, and then there'll be another piece of walnut on the bottom. Now you're going to need to make 6 of these. They're 20 inches in length. I got mine cut for 2 1/16 inch wide, because what's going to happen is once you glue this up, you're going to have glue squeeze out across here and need to clean it up. The biggest thing about this project is making everything square. So if this is 2 inches, this needs to be 2 inches. All right, so I got it cut 2 1/16, so I have room to clean up, and this will need to be exactly 1.5 inches, and this will need to be exactly 1/4 inch. So when you put this one together with the top piece, you'll have 2 inches by 2 inches. Okay, so for the amount of lumber that you need, since you're gonna be needing 6 strips of maple, 20 inches in length, 2 1/16 inch wide, you need at least 13 inches if you include, you gotta think about your kerf of your saw when you're ripping these down. So you need 6 of these, 2 1/16 wide, 20 inch in length, 1.5 inches thick. So roughly about 13 inches wide of maple, 20 inches in length. The walnut, you're gonna need 12 of these. I'm using about 7 inches width of walnut, same thing, 20 inches in length. You'll plane it down, rotate it on its edge, and then rip 1/4 inch lengths or 1/4 inch thicknesses. So that's where we're at now. I'm gonna go get my walnut and my maple, and we're gonna take it to the planer and get those things nice and flat and ready for the table saw. Now, so we're done with the planer. Now we're going to take it over to the joiner, get ourselves one side clean edge. You saw me using a planer sled. My joiner is only 6 inches wide, so in order to get the first side flat, I put it on a little planer sled and I shim around it. Gets me one nice flat side, flip it without the planer sled now, the second side, and obviously create my 2 parallel edges. Now I'll take it over here to the joiner and get myself one edge. Okay, so we got our maple and walnut. I cut my walnut down into the 20 inch lengths, and my maple and my walnut down to 20 inch lengths. I got my fence set to 2 1/16. Now we're face grain up. We're gonna rip 2 1/16 inch wide pieces. We need 3 of walnut and we'll need 6 of maple. Okay, so face up, 2 1/16 inch wide. Well, I forgot to hit record, so you missed the table saw action. All right, but use my gripper, 2 1/16 inch wide. Out of that, I originally had 7 inches wide maple at 40 inches length, cut it in half. I got 6 exactly with a couple, maybe 1/4 inch strips left at the end. So I got 6 maple blocks, maple rips, and I got 3 walnut. So next, now you got 2 1/16 inch wide, face grain up. You're gonna rotate it on its edge, right? Edge grain, long grain, whatever. You're gonna put that up, okay? Now this is kind of optional, unless you took it down to 1.5 inches on your planer or drum sander, whatever you wanna do, whatever you feel comfortable doing. I like doing it this way. I got my fence set to 1.5 inches. This is the point where it has to be 1.5 inches. Okay, just like when you rip your walnut pieces, they have to be 1/4 inch thick, because when you glue that up, there's really not much chance of changing that. If you take off too much walnut on the top versus the bottom, it's gonna be very noticeable once you start rotating this pattern around. So 1.5 right now. I'm gonna rip these 6 pieces of walnut I have, long grain up. I'm gonna rip it 1.5 inches. So then I'll have my 1.5 I'll have my 1.5 inches this way and my 2 1/16 that way. Okay, so right now, ripping all 6 of these 1.5 inches wide. I'll try to record this one. All right, on to walnut. Maple's done. We got it ripped to 1.5 inches. Now I got my my fence set to 1/4 inch. I used the little digital micrometer. Okay, so same thing, face grain up, rotate it on its edge, and here's that extra piece I had. We're gonna be cutting 1/4 inch passes, so you're gonna end up with a 1/4 inch thick piece at 2 1/16 inch long, at your 20 inches in length. You need 12 of these total. I should be able to get 5 out of each block, depending on how much you planed off of it. Depends on how much you get, so that's why I cut 3. You'll need 12 total. So that's what we're doing next. It helps to have a little push block, unless you want to do it a different way or any other way you feel safe doing it. Lots of ways to do the same thing. I have a simple little push block that I have a replaceable piece back here, and kind of allows me to make the same cuts over and over again. I use this for about the same 3 or 4 cuts, and I can just replace the back piece and still be able to push all the way through and have the whole board continue moving. Don't need to keep my fingers anywhere near the blade. All right, so here we are. All right, so that's done. This is what we're making. It's a fairly straightforward project. I checked it with a tape measure. It looks to be right at 2 inches this way, right? This has to be 2 inches at this point. This will be 2 1/16, but once we glue it up, we'll clean up the glue squeeze out and bring it back down to 2 inches. We'll do one side on the joiner and one side on the table saw. What I'm going to do now is take my micrometer and I will go through all my walnut pieces and see if there's any discrepancies that look worrying. And then if so, I can take it to the drum sander and make sure everything's nice and uniform at 1/4 inch. This is the first project I'll be doing with my drum sander. I've made this is now I think the 3rd or 4th one I've made of this style. So it's possible to do without a drum sander. What I did before is I just marked my high spots and took like 120 grit and took my time and slowly worked these things down to where I felt comfortable that they were 1/4 inch all the way across. You know, you'll be able to see it fairly quickly when you go to do your glue up. Do a dry run first, see where your gaps are, make adjustments from there, but they all need to be uniform. I mean, as soon as you start cutting this thing up and you start flipping the pattern over, if one piece of walnut is thinner than the other, it will throw off your pattern. So next thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go through all these, make sure they look really good, and then we'll get to the glue up. Okay, so here we are. This is just a dry fit. I couldn't get a good angle because I'm here on my floor because it's 2021 and I can't afford to build myself a bench. So I did end up having to run these walnut pieces through the drum sander. There were little imperfections. I had a couple sawtooth marks. So I did really light passes on the drum sander. Everything looks great. So this is just a dry fit. There's no gaps. You see a tiny little imperfection right there, but that's in between the two pieces. The actual glue up, which will be here and here, look great. So I'm not worried about that yet. So what I got here is I got some wax paper. I just took a roll of wax paper. I cut it about a little, like 2.5 inches thick. And I will put that in between the double strips of walnut. So in between these two strips. And that's gonna help so there's no glue overlap and sticking between each other. So when this is done and I take it out of the clamps, I'll have 6 individual pieces that I can take over to the joiner and the table saw and not have to worry about trying to get them unstuck. I'm also going to be putting cauls on here. I'll put them on both sides and in the middle, top and bottom. The flatter you can keep this, the better. We only gave ourselves a 1/16 of an inch to square these things back up to 2 inches. So the flatter the better. I'll also scrape the glue 30 minutes or so after we glue it up, all right? So this is that time where you want to make sure everything's nice and lined up at the ends. You don't care so much about crossing each individual one, but each glue up itself needs to be nice and straight. It'll really help you out with waste. Our 20 inches in length is you're gonna end up being with like maybe like a 1/2 inch or so at the end of this once you cut all these up. So getting everything nice and lined up now is really gonna help you out in the long run. So here we go. I'm gonna give them just a little bit of snug. I'm not really cranking down on anything yet, just getting everything to touch. Okay. I'm actually not going to use those cauls I talked about. The last time I realized it made kind of a big mess. When it squished down, it dispersed the glue across the boards and ended up being kind of a mess. So I'm just going to be watching myself here, making sure everything's nice and flat. And slowly bring all this together. Making sure you got good glue squeeze out between all of it. And we're looking pretty good. So we'll leave this here overnight and come back tomorrow. Okay, day 2 of this basket we've built. So this is what we got. We got 6 of these. Okay, this was the bottom side, the side touching the clamps. And here is my top side. I did scrape it with a just a little chisel, probably about 30 to 45 minutes after the glue up. It's hard enough to where you can scrape it, but you're not going to be tearing anything up. And that leaves you with a nice clean side. Now, if you can tell, there's tiny little, imperfection, and that's what we're going to do. I'm going to take this on the joiner, make 1 or 2 passes until it feels nice and smooth. A little glue squeeze out is gone, and then after that, I'm going to get all 6 done just on one side, and then we'll take it over to the table saw. Okay. Now you got all 6 of these planed up on one side. You're going to set your fence to 2 inches as long as your width this way is 2 inches. If you're over a little bit on all of them, maybe make that same adjustment for these sides because you need to have it squared. So I got 2 inches. I'm set my fence to 2 inches, and I will run each one through there, just squaring it up, taking off the glue. Wear your protection. It makes a mess. You're not taking off a whole lot, so dust collection is not really going to do much either. It's going to spit this stuff everywhere. You'll see. If you noticed, I was checking the sides I cut and make sure that everything is getting taken off. If for some reason one of yours is a little thin and you still have something that needs to be cleaned up, you might be able to get away with shaving it again, but if you do it on one, I would do it on all of them. I've done it before and it turned out okay, and I couldn't notice, didn't notice a difference. You're talking about a 30-second or less difference between the 2 sides, so it's not going to throw off your square that much. But if you got to remake one, remake one. If your glue up was off a little bit, I had one that I thought I was going to have to remake. It turned out to work just fine. So this glue up, let's see if I tilt you down a little bit, is pretty simple. All you're going to do is just rotate the patterns. So one up, one down. And that is it. So what I'm saying about how you're not going to have much room for error or for your glue cleanup after this, see, those are nice tight lines, no pressure, and all my joints look really good. So you can see there's your pattern on the end grain side, right? Not too worried about cleaning this up yet. I had a couple ends that are overhanging. I'm going to make sure to rotate all my ends that have a little bit of an overhang. I'm going to put them all on one side. Keep the front as square as I can. I don't make these with a whole lot of planned waste. Like I said, I think I end up with a 1/2 inch to an inch. So what I'm talking about is when you clean this up, you're going to have glue squeeze out all up here, right? Now imagine the next step. After we take this out of the clamps, we're going to be cutting whatever the thickness of your board. This is planned for 2 inches thick, right? It's going to give us an 18-inch long board, 2 inches thick. So we're going to make 9 rips at 2 inches thick. So you're going to rotate these up. So this end will be touching each other. All this face grain or edge, whatever this is, face grain I think, is going to be touching each other. So there's really not a whole lot of room for cleaning this up, because then you're going to start to change the thickness of each one individually if you have a lot of glue squeeze out. So clean it up today. 30 minutes after glue up, we're going to scrape the top. I guess you can wait longer if you want. I just like that number. After about an hour, I'm going to unclamp it, flip this over, scrape it, put it back the way it was, and clamp it up. Now this is when I should probably use cauls. On the last one I did not, because what happened, and I forgot about it when I mentioned it, but what happens is you put the caul on top and it flattens this out, and it becomes a real pain in the butt to try to get that off, and it messes up on the joiner. You have a big heavy spot with 2 glue globs, and so I'll put cauls on this side. I'll take them off when I go to scrape the glue. It's pretty much just there to line everything up anyway until you can actually put pressure on the clamps. So we're gonna go glue this up. Glue up number 2. Like I said before, do yourself a favor and do a dry fit. I got these cauls. One will go on top, one will go on bottom. See, I need to actually move my clamps in a little bit. But one will go on top, one will go on bottom, and help keep everything nice and flat. I can already feel a tiny little discrepancy between a couple of these. So I'll probably end up putting it on my drum sander and take really light passes. The other option is just hand sand it. Just be very careful that you're not creating any sort of waves in it, because once you cut these and flip them, they'll become real obvious. We're gonna go ahead and get this glued up. Okay, so I just put a little bit of pressure, really nothing at all. You can see I'm still able to move these real easy. That's just allowing me to keep everything together. Okay, I'm gonna snug everything up. All right, like I said, not a lot of pressure yet, just enough to get them to touch. Okay, now we'll go ahead and put these on. I got just Tyvek tape on some wood. I do want to make some other ones that stand a little taller once I can start doing my glue ups off the floor, because right now that's about all the space I have underneath to get these clamps on. I can't really stand this wood vertical, but it would be better if I can stand them like that. You won't get as much flex out of them. But I'm gonna put a couple clamps on each side, and that will probably be good enough, just one on each end. And I'm only gonna keep these on for the 30 minutes. And then once I take them off to scrape the top, I don't plan on putting them back on. After that, this thing's gonna sit for another 30 minutes. I'll unclamp it and scrape the glue off the bottom side. And after that, there's nothing else you can do. So, all right, now's the time where you gotta watch it. Make sure you're getting nice glue squeeze out all across. It's always a little worrying when you're looking across, and then the big sign of relief when that glue starts to slowly pick up out of there. Like that one, just barely squeezed in. You don't want a whole lot of glue. This is perfect to me. So like I said, leave it for 30 minutes. I'm gonna come back, take these off, scrape the glue. 30 minutes later, I'll release the big clamps, flip it over, scrape the glue, put it back in the clamps. Just put a little pressure on just to keep it, I guess, for my own peace of mind, and leave it for tomorrow. Okay? Okay, day 3. It's gonna be the last glue up today. This just came out. I'm going to run it through the drum sander because, like I said, I got a couple spots on both sides that have just a tiny little imperfection. So hopefully it doesn't mess anything up. Like I said, this is the first project I've done with a drum sander. The last time I did this, I did have the same kind of thing, and I just lightly sanded all the way across using pencil marks to kind of go all the way across. This way you know you're sanding evenly. Don't focus on one spot too much, just back and forth. So I'm gonna take it to the drum sander, and then we're gonna come back to the crosscut sled and start cutting it up. So it came out nice. Took like 5 or 6 passes, just I wasn't putting a lot of pressure on the drum sander, just enough to make everything nice and even. So now I got this crosscut sled set up. I have a little jig that I made for something else, a little stop block. So I got it set to 2 inches from my blade. It's gonna end up being a 2-inch thick board, and then playing it down, it will probably be, you know, 1 3/4 inch, 1 7/8. So the first thing you're going to do is trim up the first edge, like trim up the edge flush. So get this thing lined up, take one pass. As long as everything looks good, then you could hit your stop block and run through the whole board. We're looking to get 9. That will give me a 18-inch wide, 18-inch long board. Okay, so we got it done. That's what I had in waist. It is about 1 inch, 1.125 inches. So you can change the numbers from there if you like, depending on how much waist you're okay with. 1 inch isn't bad for me, gives me a little room to play if I get any sort of changes in my glue up. So let's get all the pieces in. Alright, so there you have them. I'm going to rotate them all end grain up. Alright, and then you're going to flip every other one, like 180. There it is. And hopefully at this point it looks right. Looks like a basket weave. Let's bring it a little in there. All right. So I'll put this in the clamps, we'll do a dry glue up, make sure everything looks good. You'll get a couple of these had a little rough cuts. It could be my blade, it could be anything, but I'm just gonna take some sandpaper and just kind of knock that edge down, like something like 120 or 220. I'm not trying to put a bevel on this, I'm just trying to get rid of all the little fuzzies so we have a little clean glue up and nothing gets in the way. So that's what I'm gonna do now, put it in the clamps, check out my gaps. If there's any issues, you might be able to sand them out without it being too noticeable, but again, the more you take off or if you create any dips, you're going to create problems. So it looks pretty tight. I just got a couple cuts that left a little bit of fuzzies, so I'm going to take those off and meet you by the clamps for the last glue up. Okay, so here's the dry fit. Everything looks really good. Like I said, I just took some 220 sandpaper and just stayed across the face. I didn't put it on the edge on an angle, I just stayed on each face. And that took care of all the little fuzzies from the table saw cut. So now we got our dry fit. Everything looks really good. I don't have any gaps. I don't really even have a lot of pressure on these. So all my gaps look good. I'm gonna go ahead and glue it up. Okay, so again, just like all the other glue ups we did, this point is really important to make sure your edges are perfect. You can use a straight edge, you can do it by hand. If your board was square, you should be able to just line up each edge and everything line up. Yeah, simple. You can't really square this board up after this point. If you end up taking off some of the edge, it might not look square anymore. So I just got these touching. Nothing's really even snugged up yet. I'm gonna put a little bit of pressure on the middle one. Make sure all my edges look really good. I'm just pinching that little glue joint up and making sure everything looks nice and square. All right, once you're happy with it, just gotta bring it up. Okay, and you'll just watch it. That's why you just snug it up. You know, even pressure the whole time and make sure nothing's creeping on you and everything stays lined up, and you should be good to go. Again, you could put cauls if you like them. You're gonna be running this thing, you're gonna be flattening this however you like to do it. Drum sander, a little router sled. I'm lucky enough to have a CNC machine, so I'm gonna use that to flatten it. That's it. Don't over torque it. All my glue joints look really good. So yeah, that's the end of it. So there it is. It's out of the clamps. I forgot about it and forgot to scrape off the glue. So instead of running it through the drum sander to flatten it, I'm gonna use my CNC and just pretty much scrape it. I'd rather let the drum sander do the work so I don't take off too much. And I'm just gonna flatten this thing out just a hair and get rid of the glue. And then I'll put through the rest of the drum sander. So from here on out, it's pretty much however you wanna finish it, however you wanna go about sanding it. So from here on out, it's just gonna be however you wanna finish it. I'll probably montage like this little setup that I'm gonna do here so you can see my process, but that's pretty much it. The board is done. Now it's just the finish work. So congratulations. So now, since I used 80 grit there, I'm gonna start with 60 grit with my orbital sander. And pretty much all the lines and everything are out. I'm not trying to sand anything out. I'm just any sort of line, vertical lines that are still here from the drum sander, I'm gonna take off with 60 grit. So I'll go 60, 80, 120, 150, 220, and then 320. When I hit 320, I'll spray it with water. Let it dry. It's gonna raise the grain. Hit it with 320 again, water pop it again, and then 320, and you're done. And then I'm gonna put my logo in it, and then I'll oil it up with some Odie's oil. All right, so there she is, all oiled up. Odie's oil. Everything's all done. It's ready to go. Hopefully somebody buys it. Thanks for following along.